Okay, my name is Gabriel Motzkin. I'm the director of the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, and I want to express my great pleasure at having you all here. I believe this is an important conference in what we do here in Israel, and I hope that it will be enlightening for you as it is for us. It's, I think, also not every day for you that this group comes together. Now, at the cost of repeating what I have to say several days in a row, because I have to open about 4 events, I'll just make 2 remarks about education. One is that the more I have looked at this in the year and a half that I've directed the institution, I've become more and more convinced that there is a strong interrelation between education and civil society, and that you just cannot top-down bring in the Finnish system to Colombia and hope for good results. And that we have to think very carefully about how we adapt without adapting too much. That's the other issue that I want to raise, from vision to implementation. One of the things that's clear to me is we've had lots and lots of educational plans in Israel. Commissions have sat, written books, and they sit there on the shelf, and they gather dust. And one of the things that especially the Israelis in this room, I hope, will be thinking about is how to make some of the things we learn in the next few days operational. So without further ado, I'll turn over everything to Don in Bar. Where's Don? Here you are. Okay. Enjoy yourself.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tadmor. I am chairing this session. And I would like to begin with thanking Professor Gabi Motzkin and Dan Inbar and Ronen Gofer, who actively organized this very exceptional workshop, and all the Director Generals past of the Ministry of Education in Israel, who helped us during the past months to formulate the problems and introduce their experiences. And they are Shimshon Shoshani, Elad Peled, Ronit Tirosh, Eliezer Shmueli, Dan Sharon, Shmuel Abuaf, Tzvi Peleg, and Ben Zion Del. And meanwhile, Shimshon Shoshani was past Director General when we started, became now the active Director General, replacing Shlomit Amichai. Now, the business at hand. Let me begin by saying that our roundtable conference today is a very special one. We hope that the collective vast knowledge, experience, and wisdom of you all, who are leaders of national educational systems, who are fully aware of the theoretical, political, and institutional complexities of the issues, will help us all not only to identify the key issues and not only to better understand them, but also to frame solutions needed for the betterment of our societies. It's not an easy task, but being who you are, we do have high hopes. What we'll do, we'll try to identify what are the challenges of educational policies in an era of competing trends, and what are the impediments in the implementation of the new policies, and how can they be overcome. In the morning, we'll focus more on the challenges, and in the afternoon session headed by Professor Hanok Gutfreund, my friend, Professor of Physics, past President of the Hebrew University, and an active colleague in our voluntary organization, Bashar, which is busy with social action, a voluntary organization of professors from all universities. Now, the methodology. I think that you will agree with me that complexities of the issue at hand would deserve in-depth presentations and lengthy deliberations. But since our time is very limited, we will experiment with a new discussion methodology and technique in conducting this workshop, a methodology developed by an Israeli company called Praxis, and the representative Boaz Israeli sitting next to me at the front. Now, according to this methodology, some of the key issues shared, some of the key ideas shared by you in the suggested and sent initial statements in writing that you sent us are mapped out in clusters. And the key questions that were posed: what do we want to achieve? what policies to formulate, and how to implement them. Now, on your left-hand side, there is a first cluster that deals mainly with educational content. What values, knowledge, and skills we need to inculcate into the young generation of our respective nations. In doing so, we need to consider the national culture, the proper balance between the functional versus the traditional elements, and the growing need of lifelong learning in a global society. In the initial statement, there was a wealth of suggestions what this content ought to be and how to impart it. But by and large, all of you agree that it should include a core, a basic toolkit for all, consisting of proficiency in native language and English, proficiency in math and sciences and computers, I would add, knowledge in national history and culture, as well as some familiarity with other cultures and religions. These basics are, of course, needed for personal and professional achievement, but more is needed, and some of you have listed that schools should enable the individuals to reach their full potential, develop creativity, learn tolerance and respect for others, which is crucial for any democratic society, and more. Now, these are all tools and knowledge, but how about values? I personally believe that in addition to plain decency, honesty, truthfulness, compassion, basic morality and ethical behavior, one key universal central element of any educational system should be to impart to all our children in the schools the value of intellectual integrity, which I think was best defined by Hannah Gray, former president of the University of Chicago, as follows: critical and independent judgment, respect for evidence, openness to other points of view, tolerance of complexity and uncertainty, willingness to undertake a re-examination and to suspend final judgment, patience with rigorous and painful analysis, refusal to bend to the fashionable and the comfortable, and insistent on reasoned explanation. These are, she said, among the constituents of principled conduct in the realm of intellectual integrity. I think it's well defined. Now, the second cluster on the right-hand side deals with the kind of policies that need to be formulated to achieve the goals of the education. All this is based more or less on the written statement that you have sent in. Here we have a wealth of options, some of them fundamentally different from the others. They are different because they are rooted very much in national culture, demographic realities, political consideration, and tradition. Moreover, they need to maintain appropriate balances, as you have said in the statements, between uniformity and differentiation, between the academic and the vocational, between center and periphery, between national and local control, between uniformity and diversity in response to the multicultural nature of the societies, between the private and the public, and between transparency and discretion, and more. But hovering above all these, there is the slippery issue of the quality of teaching and learning. One really doesn't need expert evidence to realize that great teachers lead to memorable learning experiences, and good teaching is the key component of a good education. Each of us, I am sure, can pinpoint the one or two, and if very lucky, the three teachers who touched their lives and shaped their character. On this issue, I always wondered if the huge, all-inclusive, expanding educational system, which needs a very large number of teachers, don't dry up the available pool of potential teaching talent. This happens in the sciences. In any population, you can find just so many who can become scientists. For the others, no training will suffice. Perhaps in education, like in sciences. If indeed this is the case, there is only one solution, and that is developing and using very sophisticated, intelligent teaching technologies, far beyond what we have today. Indeed, Richard Nesbitt, in a recent book published this year, Intelligence and How to Get It, Why Schools and Cultures Matter, find that advanced teaching technologies do make a difference for the better, while many other traditional ones seem not to. But the last cluster deals with implementation. And the main ideas collected from the initial statement have a number of common features. One, consensus of all stakeholders is always needed. The polder model, as the Dutch call it, I hope that's the correct interpretation. Second, The system cannot be under constant strain and reforms. 3, when change is implemented, be it sweeping, gradual, and partial, patience, perseverance, and stability is needed. And in this respect, we must remember that the time constants in the education are not measured in months, neither in years, nor in the political time constraints of elected governments looking for quick fixes, but it may take decades to do a good job. Okay. Now, as far as procedural matters, we will now begin the round of statement of the participants representing his or her country who submitted written statements. Each one will have 4 or 5 minutes to illuminate the main ideas that were provided in the written statement or add to them new ones. We'll do it by the order of sitting, beginning from left here, your right, and around the table. Following this round, after the break, we have the 5-minute statements of invited experts, and then comments by the Israeli Directors General and other representatives from Israel, as well as comments from all participants. Now, throughout this process, the practice people will record the new statements, type them on the board, and then idea hunters or scouts will extract from the statements certain ideas, and per your instruction, they will put it in the appropriate cluster or create new clusters. So by the end of the day, hopefully, a new map will emerge, which will expand our understanding of what's going on. A new map which will be discussed in the afternoon, and again, a session that Professor Gutfreund will chair. Now, all the CVs are in the booklet, and I'm sorry, I wanted to introduce everybody to say a few words, but they wouldn't let me about each of you. And also, the initial statements are in the book, so hopefully everybody read those. And therefore, in your opening remarks, you may illuminate, as I said before, or introduce new ideas, which will make it far more interesting. Okay, so thank you very much, and I wish us all a very productive, unusual conference. Now we'll start the round of statements, and the first one is Professor Ben Levine, Deputy Minister of Education, Ontario, Canada.
Thank you. So 4 minutes, 30 seconds of context, 30 seconds of history, and 2 minutes of strategy. Context. The Ontario education system has 2 million students in about 5,000 schools in 72 districts, which have locally elected school boards. We have about 120,000 teachers. We operate 4 systems of education: French Catholic, French Public, English Catholic, and English Public, all 100% funded by the provincial government. It's a very diverse student body, so 27% of the population of Ontario was born outside of Canada, and 50% of the population of Toronto was born outside of Canada, which makes Toronto among the most diverse cities in the world. Over the last 5 years, we've had the same government. We have 3 big goals for education: improve student outcomes, reduce the inequities in student outcomes, and increase public confidence in public education. And I want to stress the last one, because if the public does not think that public education gives good value, they will neither send us their children nor give us their money. So over the last 5 years in Ontario, we have improved every student outcome that we measure. And at the same time, we've also improved teacher morale and dramatically reduced the number of people leaving teaching early. So we've had a reasonable record of success, although we are only about halfway to the goals we've set ourselves on student outcomes. It's important to recognize that education is a mass institution. So we are not going to improve an education system by having a great school here and a great school there, or a charter school, or a project. That won't do it, because we have 120,000 teachers, and we need them all to get better, not just a few of them. So in our thinking about reform, we need to keep in mind that we are talking about large-scale institutions and lifting the whole level of the whole institution across a large number of schools. How have we tried to do that? Clear, simple goals. So we've set numerical targets for outcomes. There are only a few of them, and they're very simple and easy for people to understand. We've had what my colleagues Michael Barber and Michael Fullen would call a guiding coalition. That is, we've had a very close connection between the political leadership, the civil service leadership, and the leadership in the education sector and the school system. We have built a significant implementation infrastructure. You cannot improve 5,000 schools by giving them a new curriculum document or by having 2 consultants. So we have hundreds of people working on school improvement, sustained from year to year to year with the same kind of program. We have put a lot of effort on political dialogue. We have learned that you cannot improve schools on the backs of teachers. You must bring the educators with you, and so a lot of work in Ontario has gone into making sure we have good labor relations, but also into creating many venues for teachers, parents, school boards, principals to meet together and talk about what we're trying to achieve so that we have consensus on our goals and strategies. We've put a huge amount of effort into building capacity at all levels of the system, improving the quality of our principals, helping our teachers get better at their work, helping people use data more effectively, a wide range of things. Again, keeping in mind that you have to do this with tens of thousands of people, not just a few here and there. And I would take the view that our capacity for improvement is not limited. In fact, my own view is that every time we try and push the limits of what people are capable of, we find out that more people are capable of more things than we thought they were if we provide the right support and encouragement. And the last point I'll make is the importance of research, evidence, and feedback loops in the system so that you have constant feedback about how well are we doing, what's working well, what isn't, and then a collective process of thinking through what isn't working well and improving it. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I think we made a mistake. We should have been the last one because we think that's the solution. I think everybody should read your book. Delegation. Our second speaker is Mr. Bertil Ostberg, State Secretary Minister of Education, Mr. Sweden.
Okay. Yes. In Sweden, we are not as successful as they are in Canada, but since 20 or 30 years, we have a very decentralized system in Sweden. The schools, they get the funding per pupil, and the head teachers, they decide which teachers they want to hire and so on, and which salaries they should have. And we also have a system with the private schools. We call them independent schools. These independent schools are funded by the municipalities. And they get money on the same conditions as the municipal schools. And they are not allowed to take out any fees. We have a national curriculum, which is decided which subject the schools should teach, and it's the same for all schools, and all teaching should be non-denominational. The syllabus is in the different subjects. There's no description of the content in the subject, and the goals are rather vague. And the idea has been to give the schools very much freedom and to rely on the professional competence of the teachers and the head teachers and so on. But the result of all this is not very good. Those are national investigations, and when we're looking at the international reports, PISA, TIMSS, and PIRLS, and so on, we can see that the result in the outcome in the Swedish schools is falling, especially in mathematics. And this is the real challenge that we have to get a better outcome in the schools. And I should also add that in Sweden has been very much focused on other things than basic knowledge and skills. We were talking a lot about that it's important to creativity, it's important for the lust to learn, it's important to learn how to learn, and of course this is important. But if you can't read and write and count properly, then it doesn't work. And that is the situation that we have now. More and more children can't read and write properly. So now we are trying to change all this. We're starting with precise goals in every subject, but we don't think it's enough with precise goals. We need to have evaluation, and so we introduce national tests. There has been a real hard debate in Sweden about national tests and national goals in the school year 3 in Swedish and mathematics. But now we have introduced it. We are focusing very much on a national school inspection, and they're also focusing very much on raising the teacher's competence. It's not easy, but we're trying to change the initial teacher training. We're spending a lot of money on training of the already existing teachers, and the idea is, of course, to make more people interested in becoming teachers and to get talented students so that they also want to become teachers, and that is not the fact today. We also try to reach head teachers' competence, and well, we hope that we will get the same development as they have seen in Canada, but we haven't seen it yet. We also know that it will take some time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Bridget McManus, Secretary General, Department of Education and Science, Ireland.
Thank you. In Ireland, our education system would generally be recognised or accepted by the public as one they are quite happy with, and internationally we do very well on comparative OECD figures in literacy, and while we are above average in maths and science, we would not be happy with that, particularly given quite a focus in our economic development on industry that does require high levels of maths and science. So, but generally the challenges and the reform issues that we have in our country arise as much because of rapidly changing society, both internally in terms of differences in values and expectations because of high migration, which was not a feature at all in Ireland up to 10 years ago, and because of issues like including students with special needs, whether they be disabilities or whether they be students traditionally who have not performed well because of social disadvantage. And in fact, much of the debate in how we meet those challenges tends to focus about how the system is structured, managed and supported, rather than perhaps the curriculum issues, which I understand are some of the debate for you here today. Just to say a piece about the curriculum and maybe about the structures, which may be of interest to your debate. In the curriculum, I think the pressures, apart from some of the math science issues, are more about wanting the school system to do more and more about wider social issues. In other words, every time we have a problem in society, whether it's alcohol and drug abuse, whether it's about obesity, whether it's about road safety, the question tends to be asked is why is there not a program in schools to deal with this? As well as in the curriculum, we should do more languages at primary, we should do more science, we should teach them about other countries, and this gives a curriculum overload on how you balance maths and literacy and core competencies that are so essential, as my Swedish colleague said, against all those other demands. And yes, education has a part. Yes, as I think my UK colleague said in his paper, cross-cutting issues are very important, how you link with other social policies. But there is also a tendency to expect the education system to compensate for the absence of values elsewhere and things that are not being supported in families or communities. So that for us is a tension in curriculum design and in societal expectations of an education system. Just to say, we have a new curriculum in primary level which we introduced over the period 1999 to 2007, which was very much developing new skills and very much focused on making children active agents in their learning, and that requires quite a change in teaching practice. It's probably generally regarded as successful, but there are still challenges when we evaluate evaluate how it's happening on the ground in terms of supporting teachers and changing their practice. I should say in our system we have a denominational system of education at primary level, so that there is a period each day allowed for the ethos of the faith, religious ethos, or it's a non-religious school ethical curriculum. At junior cycle we have a 3-year cycle with 25 subjects, of which only 3 subjects, Irish, English and mathematics, are compulsory. But in practice in most schools you will find a wider number. There are 9 or 10 subjects studied. We then have a transition year programme, which was a new innovation to transit students from junior cycle to senior cycle, which may be of interest to discuss at some point, but it's very much to try and take students out of the more traditional exam assessment oriented, very pressured environment into more life skills, issues like business skills, enterprise, social enterprise. And after that there is a 2-year programme to the terminal examination, which has 33 subjects, of which only 1 of the Irish language is compulsory, but in practice 99% of students do English, mathematics. And the criticism there and challenge is that our system is perhaps overly driven by assessment drivers and the university entrance exam requirements, which are based on the legal certificate, because about 2/3 of our students will go on to nearly 70% to some form of further education. So the challenge to us is, without losing the strength and there's a huge trust in the quality of that examination and the quality of the education, how we can perhaps get it more into the lifelong learning, desire to learn phase without losing the strength of it. On our structures, just to say that, and I know it's an issue about both, I think, in private versus public, it's perhaps an issue of state-run schools or public-run schools as opposed to diversity in our country, where it is largely church-run but fully state-funded and regulated schools. The issues I think that arise for us are very much about with the changing society, to have primary schools that are largely Catholic, how you respect other faiths within those schools, and indeed those of no faith, which is a growing percentage of the Irish population. So some of the issues about we are experimenting with some new models run by the state, where you would allow multi-groups but separate for part of the day, and what that means for ethos, for groups that want ethos through the whole of the school day is a big issue for us. But actually what is more an issue, which I don't think was touched on in many of the papers, is the issue of how you manage schools where you have a very strong voluntary ethos in management, parental board of management or church-based board of management, in a situation where the capacity may not be there at that decentralized level to manage them. And that probably is as much, if not more, an issue for us in supporting teaching and learning. And I think that's not something perhaps that's sufficiently recognised that may be an issue. So just to say, in terms of some of our, we have a strong teacher education tradition, and the quality of our teachers is good. Motivating and keeping up, supporting the skills right through their teacher career is something we have been doing more recently. And that is something that it will be a challenge in the time ahead with tighter economic times, not to lose focus on, not to find that economic measures require you to pull back from some of those vital support measures.
Thank you. This, I think you would agree that those that have no faith do have faith in rationality and humanity. And the problem of curriculum constraints is very evident in universities, in my university engineering, is we have the same problem. And what we do as far as lifelong learning, but we cannot cram in everything that we know. Okay, the next speaker is Dr. Bakhtela.
Research informs us that most of the reforms all over the world have failed.
Excuse me, I forgot to tell that you are past You have many.
I have passed many things.
You have in other places that you are former Director General of the Ministry of Education. I'm sorry.
Research tells us that
Former General, right?
Director General in general as well.
Research tells us that reforms all over the world have failed up to now. Even I just read a report about NCLP published in the some policy journal issued maybe this year or last year, and the result of NCLP is similar to the results of all the reforms preceding NCLP. Now, the question that I have asked, and the same findings we can find as well in Israel as in the United States. I did read about studies made in Ontario or in Sweden or in Ireland, but as being a 52nd state of the United States, following the fads and the fashions of the United States, we have to ask ourselves if this is what the research tells us, what is really the problem and how are we going to meet these challenges. Now, I think that there are several premises that I would put in order at least to consider these findings. One is that educational policy has a syndrome of a pendulum, going from one edge to another, like this. 20 years ago, the student, the child was in the center. Nowadays, the content is in the center. And probably 10 years ahead, the child will return to be the center. So we are moving back and forth to different extremes. Secondly, at least in Israel, the time scale, the political time scale, and the professional time scale are different and conflicting, which enhance instability of policy. If we change every 1.5 or 2 years the minister and the top administration of the ministry, and everyone comes for a short period and wants to perform very much and to show to his electorate that he is bringing revelation of the truth, and we are moving from one edge to another. The third point is we are looking for magical solutions, and probably there is no magical solution to this problem. And last comment, I think, is the problem of what I call conflicting values. We tend to look for an absolute solution to everything, either equality or free access or implementation, performing your abilities, etc., etc. There is always a conflict between, and it's not politically correct probably to say, between equality and excellence. And there should be a kind of a middle point between excellence and equality. So, to sum up in 4 minutes, maybe less than 4 minutes, I think that although the challenges and the problems are similar in most of the, I'll call it most of the Western civilization part of the world, differences in the political culture, in the history, in the demographical and sociological composition of the societies makes it a little bit complex and maybe impossible to transplant the solution from Texas to Jerusalem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, excellence and quality do not conflict as equal opportunity, but excellence can be promoted. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. José Lazaros, Director General of Primary and Secondary Education in the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science in the Netherlands.
Thank you. Since the beginning of the 21st century, the Netherlands have been confronted with a decline in numeracy and literacy. The 2003 and 2006 PISA results are also highlighted the slow decline both for reading and mathematics. In the same period, the Netherlands Bureau for Economic Policy Research reported that the Netherlands lagged behind in the upper ranks of the PISA intelligence. In other words, we deliver, compared with other wealthy countries, fewer outstanding students than might be expected. This is quite disturbing since we know that excellence leads to innovation and productivity in highly developed countries. Because of this situation, the government, which took office in 2007, was extremely determined to raise the quality of education. One of the main strategies was to introduce national standards for literacy and numeracy, which in turn leads to a lot of discussion concentrated mainly on the following two issues: the delicate balance between professional autonomy and state intervention, and the even more delicate balance between freedom of choice in education and state intervention. For this time, I would like to focus here on the second issue. The balance between state power and responsibilities and competencies of schools is important because in order to perform well, there has to be a balance in systems between centralized decision-making and decentralized decision-making. In the context of the Dutch educational system, national standards are a way of centralizing decision-making. We do have primary objectives or attainment targets in primary education and also in the first phase of secondary education. But those are broad descriptions and leave a lot of room for interpretation by schools and teachers who are able to apply the objectives to their own convictions and conditions. If those standards will be more prescriptive, they may potentially disturb the balance between the central level and the school level. In the Netherlands, we do have a constitutional right that guarantees the freedom of parents to establish schools according to their own convictions within the publicly financed system. We therefore need to initiate a discussion about the fundamentals of the educational system in our country. Freedom doesn't mean no responsibility to quality. Such a discussion can take place in the Netherlands because we approach such issues by relying on our tradition of pragmatic decision-making involving all relevant parties in order to reach consensus, the Polder model. Allow me to give a couple of examples about current issues in Dutch education. Firstly, regarding the introduction of standards for reading and math, all professionals and other interested parties will be consulted in order to set these standards. Pioneers within the school system are currently testing various methods and will learn from the results and then share the knowledge gained, thus stimulating lateral learning between schools. My second example concerns the issue of segregation in education, I think also a problem here in Israel. State interventions to mix pupils from diverse ethnic origins are essentially at odds with the freedom for parents to found and choose schools and to determine the principles on which a school is based. Studies have shown that this type of intervention can often result in unwanted side effects. That's why we are now subsidizing experiments in 7 cities in the Netherlands to test various types of intervention methods to mix pupils, such as specific information for parents and schools in the neighborhood, a central registration office which spreads children across schools, and fixed registration times for new children. Because you see that children from people who are well educated register very early on good schools, so those schools aren't available for other children anymore. An important feature of initiatives like these is that they are based on agreements between all stakeholders and on voluntary cooperation. This way, we try to figure out a balance between state intervention and demands on the quality of education on one hand, and freedom of choice of education and autonomy of schools on the other hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You entered the website about your cultural history.
Here's another example. We also had this, there was a request in the country that we should be more aware of our history. But it's always very difficult. Well, we had a professional group, a committee, and said, okay, these are the 50 main things in Dutch history. We call them windows. Then we wanted to legislate them, so it would be a part of the program for primary education. The State Council said it would, if you would do that, it would be in contradiction with our Article 23, with our Constitution. So now we say, okay, these are 50 main events. We put them in legislation, but the schools can introduce them as a form of inspiration. So they have to use it, but they can translate it in their own way, just as an inspiration, and then it's just in between the balance of central organizing and the own autonomy.
Thank you. If anybody wants, I suggest and recommend that you go into the website. It's fascinating, just so how modern computer technology can be used beautifully. It's well done and it's very interesting. Perhaps not nice to say, but and politically incorrect, but it gives some gratification that we are not the only ones that are declining international debt. But I think the common thread that goes through here is generally a tightening of requirements. The pendulum. That's the Well, our next speaker is Mr. Mahdi and Director General of Primary and Secondary Education, Ministry of Education, Culture and Tennant, Deputy Secretary General of Youth and Foreign Relations, Estonia.
Thank you very much. I think I would start by mentioning that Estonia is by far the smallest country represented here at the conference, because our population is only 1.4 million. And in the northern countries, we say that if a car stuck in the snow, then it's far more easy to push it out from the snow than to push out a truck from the snow. So it means that in a small country, the reforms are easier to carry out. But as the colleague from Israel said, that up to now all the reforms in the world have failed. So now I understand why the reforms in Estonia also have failed. And it's interesting to mention that the situation changed after the 2006 results of 2006 PISA studies were published, because Estonia performed remarkably well in these studies, and the same situation with TIMSS studies which were carried out the year before. So after that, when these results were studied, many of our educators started to think that maybe it's time to change from revolution to evolution, and probably to take down the pace of reforms. And this is my personal opinion, that I think this is the right way. In the education system, the past reforms probably are not the best way to develop the system and to provide everybody with equal opportunities. So I will just mention some of the points which were presented already in our essay, but which seem to me to be the most important one. Of course, at first, we are talking about globalization and increasing multiculturalism in the society and in the education. And before coming here, I thought that we have a very complicated situation in Estonia because of a long time of Soviet occupation, different national and language minorities. But when I came here, and yesterday we had a wonderful tour of the old town, and we heard a lot about history, different religions, different nations living in Israel, then I understood that, well, our problems are just small, minor family problems. This is not the real complex of the multiculturalism and globalization in education. So I think Israel probably is the best place where to talk about the issues of globalization and multiculturalism in education. And I'm happy if I can contribute some way to this discussion. In small countries, in addition to the new requirements, in small countries like Estonia, we have taken into consideration that we must handle the task of preserving and developing our languages and cultures. It's easier in bigger countries. In Estonia, this may include, for example, ensuring the survival of providing higher education in the local language, because English is coming everywhere. And like in Ireland, after joining EU, the attention towards the Irish language started to raise. So the same situation in Estonia. We had a period of Russification, but we maintained our language and our culture, and now I think we are still developing pretty well our university education in Estonian language. Every child, just as every country and culture, is definitely different. This is why it is impossible to regulate child's growing and learning process on the national level. It is also impossible for the state to strictly regulate the training of teachers, creating the learning environment, or the school's role in the process. But what can be done on the national level? It is possible to set up an idea of what the society expects from the students and the schools they attend. So, at the moment, probably the most hot topic in education in Estonia is finishing the process of preparing new national curricula for basic schools and upper secondary schools. One of the main focus points in the curriculum development process is devoting more attention to differences. Passions still flare over this issue, and related provision of greater freedom of choice to students and schools, along with reduction of the number of lessons prescribed by the national curriculum. A socially acceptable balance can be found only through constructive debates involving all participants of the education system. These debates must focus on children's rights and on the goal of creating an education system that would realize the developmental potential of the children in the best possible way. So, creation of equal opportunities for all students, it is a very complicated issue, as you can understand, and it doesn't mean that all the students must be treated equally, but in the same situations they must have the equal rights. So, they must have the right to study their native language, which could be different from the Estonian language. They must study the history of their own nation if they are not the native of the native country, and so on and so on. So I would conclude my presentation with this, and I really look very much forward to the exchange of experience of 4 different countries represented here, because situation in every of the represented countries is very, very different. And there's no way that, for example, Estonia could tell you that please take our model and you will be successful. There's no way. So just, I think it is possible to learn everywhere, and every person should take out, find out some what would be most interesting for him or her to take home and to use it in the future. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, your accomplishments in education are admirable, but not necessarily economic success. And in fact, in a recent major study that we did, Israel 2028, a national strategic socio-economic plan, we sent benchmarking teams to your country, as well as we did to Ireland, which is another small country which is very successful economically.
Unfortunately, I have to add that as quickly as Estonia went up with the economy in the world crisis, it goes down the same with the same speed. But of course, we are not going as deep as we were.
I know that, but that will go up again. The direction and the planning and the thinking and the determination Now, our next speaker is Mr. Nils Kreisler, Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Education of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Denmark, we are spending much about the average expenditure in European countries on our primary and lower secondary school. But our results are only average. And in some areas, they are really too bad. Most importantly, more than 15% of the pupils leave lower secondary school without sufficient reading capacity, and that is a serious problem. Another problem, a growing problem, is that the number of children who need special education, special care, is growing. At the moment, we are using 20% of the total expenditure in primary and lower secondary school for extra help, for special teaching for these people. And the problem is growing. There are more pupils with social problems with dealing with the other pupils in the classroom, with adapting themselves to the discipline of the school. And it is a growing problem, and something which we have to look into. Another problem is that the percentage of the pupils who are interested in science is too low. We have difficulties in having pupils study science at the upper secondary school and university. So we lack too many, are more interested in sociology, human science things. That can be okay, but we don't need that many lack of people interested in science. The PISA results and the comparisons between the countries has of course been an eye-opener for us, because we have always thought that since we used so much money, and because we were so splendid in so many ways, as a matter of course we also had the best educational system, and we had realized that we had not. Though one thing I would like to stress, and that is a score where we had very high scores in the PISA exams, and that is that all Danish pupils are happy to go to school. They like to go to school. I think you can say that we have a school which is a good school for the average people from the middle class well-to-do folks. Our problem is that we have not sufficient challenges for the very bright students, and we have not sufficient tools to deal with pupils with special difficulties. It's very good for the average people. For people, immigrant people coming from homes that do not understand the Danish system, Danish liberty, the expectations that all of the pupils are acting independently be say, part in discussions, it can be catastrophic for those pupils because they're used to more authoritarian school systems, and they simply have great difficulties in finding their ways in our school system. So, well, the challenge is to have better results without destroying the qualities of our educational system. This ability of making creative and independent and happy pupils. We have taken steps very much in line with what our Swedish colleague told us. We have introduced or are introducing obligatory national tests. We are working on a very refined system. They are computer tests. They are adaptive, which means that if the pupil gives a right answer to a question, then the next question will be more difficult. And if he gets the wrong answer, the next question.
That's not a discourage.
Huh?
That's discouraging.
No, the idea is that we should be able to draw a more precise profile of the capabilities of the child. And there should be challenges for the bright students, and those who are not so bright should not be discouraged. But we should be able to, well, this is something that we are introducing now. I think we have also had a discussion on the curricula. We have had a discussion on Article 1 in our legislation, where the purpose of the school is defined, and the general idea has been the strengthening of the curricula. We have introduced obligatory quality reports. Municipalities who are responsible for the primary schools have to discuss every year the quality of the schools, making it not a political field. Well, we are taking other measures, but I will come back to that.
Thank you very much. You said 20% of the budget was for extra help. Why is that? Why? So that's a huge number.
We're trying to find out why we are. It's a huge number, but we also have a very generous system. But perhaps it's too generous, and perhaps the tools we are using are not the adequate tools.
Thank you. Our next speaker is member of the Parliament in Israel, former Director General of the Ministry of Education.
We must take into consideration the universal core of values and the universal core of functions that we have to give these students, these graduates. So this is common to all of us. On the other hand, and beside it, every country has its own specific heritage, and we want, at least in Israel, we want very much to be sure that our children, our students, even if they go outside the country, they still go with their heritage, with their roots, Jewish roots or Arab roots, just not to forget from where they are coming, and hopefully where they are going back after they finish their career, or in the middle of their career, or after they finish their studies. Before we are going to think about the way we are going to implement our policy, we have to decide about our policy, and especially in Israel we have a very big problem because our society is very sectorial, it's very heterogeneous. It's not that we have only Jewish society and Arab society. Inside the Jewish society we have ultra-Orthodox, we have Orthodox, we have conservative people, we have secular people, and in the Arab society we have the Muslims, we have the Christians, we have the Druze, Turkish. So each one of them, each part wants to be to have their core values and to keep it, to reserve it. And that's why we have to find a very unique but common policy that can give answer to each of our students. It's very difficult to agree about a common core curriculum, and I think that's why we have some problems we are going to be examining national and international exams. Of course, we have problems with deciding about the standards, which, if I translate, standard is not the minimum, but the basic level that we have to be sure each child is there. And this is also something that is very difficult to agree about. Our policy must be implemented. I mean, it can be very large, very big, and we are going to conquer every part of it. We must go step by step, very carefully, and in each step we must see what are the problems, and it must be flexible in order to change it during our motion, I mean, during our implementing these steps. We must find, I think, in order to succeed to implement this policy, we must find some points that are small but big enough to make the whole change. I mean, we have to see, sometimes we can see it before, but usually we have to see it by moving from one step to another, and that's why we have to be very flexible. I think in Israel, maybe in other countries, the political aspect is very not only important, but it influences very much our policy, because almost the average, almost every 2 or 2.5 years, the government is changing, and every minister that comes wants to put his way, and sometimes he wants another policy on the other side of the map. Right. And when, especially in the educational system, when you want to internal the policy and to implement it, it takes a long time, very long. And the teachers don't understand what they want, what the minister and the director general wants from them, and all of a sudden you have to change it to another side, totally another side of the map, the ideology, and sometimes even the budget. Even the budget is changing. And if I mention the budget, I must mention the finance ministry. I don't know how it is in your country, but in Israel they are very tough, and they don't like to give the money, just like this. Sometimes they behave like they are the professionals, and sometimes they decide what is important and what is not important, what we can delay and what not. And that's why when we are going to implement the policy, we must make many efforts in order to bring the finance ministry with us, and make them believe that this is the most, the ultimate challenge that the country has. And maybe the last or the two last things, very shortly. One is the media. In Israel, they influence very much the public opinion, and they are very critical, and they like to criticize, not to show the nice and the good results, but the faults of the system, and it affects a lot the minister and the director general, and sometimes they change things, not because of the media. The last thing is that every minister must understand, like I said before, when you want to internal curriculum and values, you must be very patient and not to, because you are in a hurry to show something before your period is over, just to do things very quick and then you damage the system.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you very much. I'll jump a little bit to Sir Michael Barber because he has a meeting later on with the Minister of Education and he cannot speak when the round of experts will be speaking. So Sir Michael, please.
Thank you. First of all, it's a real privilege to hear these stories from so many. It's a real privilege to hear the stories from so many thoughtful education system leaders. And the observation I want to make, and I would love to hear the other stories, and no doubt we'll come back to this later on, is I think we're in a very, very interesting period in the history of education reform. In the 1980s, the research community identified the characteristics of effective schools. People like Peter Mortimer and many others made that very, very clear. And then in the 1990s, we had a phase of saying, well, now we know what an effective school looks like. How do we improve schools so that they become effective? And now we're in a phase, and you can hear it in the story, where we're beginning to identify the characteristics of effective systems. And then the debate becomes, how do you become effective? And that's what all the debate's about. So I think we're in a phase where system reform, education system reform is becoming professionalised. So instead of in each country we sit in our own little offices and try and work out what to do, because of the PISA comparisons and the TIMSS comparisons and the way global education research is developing, we're beginning to see common themes and common approaches, and indeed we're beginning to see things that work and things that don't work in a much clearer way than was true even 5 or 10 years ago. And while I agree with the comments that Allied, for example, made that most reforms fail, actually not all of them fail. And that story is a good example. While I agree that you can't take what's being done in Texas and translate it to Jerusalem, or you can't just copy Finland, even though we can all admire it, we can learn lessons from those things and pull out lessons that are generally applicable. And that's what we tried to do a year and a half ago in the report we published called How the World's Best Performing School Systems Come Out on Top. We were taking the PISA and TIMSS data over many years and identifying characteristics of the best systems in the world according to those databases, but also of some improving systems. I just want to pull out some lessons from that and then make a comment about the third of your questions about how to implement it. So the characteristics that emerged in our findings of seriously researching the top 10 systems according to PISA and TIMSS and then looking at some improving systems were these. First of all, systems do set clear standards. They internationally benchmark their standards, and several of you have already said that you're in the process of refining or developing national standards or national curriculum. And in physics and maths and the national language, those things are becoming internationally known. And although it's difficult to do, they're not as they're not like social studies or history or literature, where obviously you want your own cultural or diverse sectors within the country. But in physics and maths, on the whole, they don't change at national boundaries. So national standards. Secondly, great systems make sure that every student is on the agenda. So whereas in the 20th century, lots of systems encouraged teachers to teach students, and some students did well, some did badly, and we just assumed that that's how it was. Now, the great systems are making sure that when a child falls behind their peers, something is done to catch them up, which may be one reason why Denmark is spending 20% of its budget on special education. It's certainly what Finland does very well. Whereas a lot of systems still, if a child doesn't learn, they just assume it's something to do with the child or the family, whatever. So every child being on the agenda and the barriers being removed is the second characteristic. Thirdly, the great system seems to be very, very good at making teaching an attractive profession. And that's not just about pay. In fact, when we studied it, those systems like Finland and Singapore that recruit good teachers, they have reasonable pay, but not exceptional pay by international benchmark standards. But they make the profession attractive. They train those teachers very well at the beginning of their career. They give them good positions in the school. And when they start teaching, they become part of a profession that thinks its job is to constantly improve its practice. part of the culture in the school that teachers are constantly improving their practice. So they don't just go into the classroom, shut the door, and make it up each day without reference to their profession. Michael Fulham, a colleague of Ben's in Ontario and a friend of many of us, talks about deprivatising teaching. That's what this is about. It's about teaching not being an individual activity you do in one classroom, but you do collectively because you're learning from the data how to improve your practice all the time. And then the final characteristic is, on the whole, great systems have very good leadership at the school level. It may be individual, it may be collective, but they really invest in the quality of school leadership. And you think of a school leader as the conductor of an orchestra, the person who brings together the human, other resources, the community to make a great school, and brings that consistency to the quality of teaching. When we talk to students in Singapore and Finland and some of the other best performing systems, when you ask them which are your best teachers, well, there are people they like better than other people, but they just say all our teachers are good teachers. Whereas in an English school, that's not the case. They say, oh, so-and-so's really good and so-and-so very good. So the consistency is what these systems are doing very well. So while I agree that sometimes, very often, reform fails, increasingly we do know some of the lessons. I've just summarised it there very briefly. There was a Russian Prime Minister in the 1990s who retired after a year in office and said, we tried to do better, but everything turned out as usual. We can do better than that now. It's a very Russian remark. The second thing that's being professionalised around the world, which is not just the lessons about what enables good systems to succeed. The thing that's being professionalised, not just in education, by the way, is how to deliver. Your third question, how to implement. In the Blair government, when I worked for the Prime Minister, we developed a thing called the delivery unit, the Prime Minister's delivery unit. Our job was to make sure that Tony Blair's domestic policy priorities got implemented on time, on standard in education, health and other areas. And we learnt a lot that the finance ministry describes our method of deliverology, which we think was meant to be abuse, of course, but the idea deliverology is the emerging science of getting things done in government. And there are some very clear things that work. And we experimented with it in the Blair government, but I've not seen this. You see it in what Ben has been doing in Ontario, where the Premier there has followed some of the lessons from England and adapted them and improved them. The Dutch Prime Minister has shown real interest in this. The Mayor of Los Angeles has done things like that. So all around the world, people are beginning to learn about liberology, and something's become clear. One is, you've got to know what you're trying to do. It doesn't have to be a published target, but it does have to be some kind of measurable goal. Or to put it in words that people like better, you have to have a definition of success, and you have to know at any given moment whether you're making progress towards it. Otherwise, it's very difficult to reform anything. Secondly, Ben used the phrase a guiding coalition. You need a group of people at the centre of reform who understand what that reform is, how it works, what's intended, and how the implementation is meant to be achieved. It's easy to say, it's very difficult to achieve that. You've got to get the finance ministry, maybe the Prime Minister's office, maybe some inspection agency, all with a shared agenda around that. Thirdly, everybody knows, and people have mentioned the media and all the other things that happen in government. Government is driven by crises and events and media stories. So the thing that delivers results is routines, really effective routines focusing on the measurable goal. In Ontario, Ben didn't mention this, but Dalton McGuinty, the Premier, has every 2 months a review with Ben and his team of what's happening. Is it working? If it's not working, what are you doing about it? Identifying problems early and solving them. So these routines that can be established in government are very, very important. Otherwise, you just end up being dragged from one crisis and media story to the next. And then another bit that I'm just giving you some highlights of deliverology. It's got to be sustained over time, which is obvious. But so many reforms you see around the world, and the reason so many of them fail is people start on them, and even if they're good in the design, by the time you get to the really heavy, deep implementation phase, people have forgotten all about it, and they will say, oh, that's an interesting idea, I wonder what happened to that, and it's kind of vanished off the agenda. So the sustaining over time is important. And then the final point I'll make, although there's much more to this, is when a reform is designed, when an idea is conceived, whether it came from outside and into government or whether it was designed inside government, very often people fail to work out what the delivery chain is. How would this actually get done? They sit in the centre of government and they send out guidance, or they publish a report, and they assume that in some bizarre way this will get adopted. The example I use is in 1997, when I was first in the Blair administration, my minister announced that we were going to massively improve literacy in primary schools. 80% of students would achieve this high standard that at that point was 57% students. So that's the kind of thing politicians do all the time. But when you say that kind of thing in Parliament, you're making an assumption which, if you step back out of the world of government and think from it, is very bizarre. The minister is standing up in Parliament and assuming that he can influence what goes on in the head of an 11-year-old in Liverpool or Newcastle or Bristol. It's quite bizarre, really, isn't it? So what is the delivery chain? Well, the delivery chain between that boy or girl, for that matter, in Liverpool or Bristol is, well, first of all, there's a teacher that teaches that boy or girl. Maybe we can influence the teacher. How would we do that? How do we influence the teacher? Well, there may be a variety of mechanisms, but the school leader, the head teacher, or principal will be influenced. So we've got two steps in the delivery chain. And then, as Bridget was saying, there's a school governing body of amateurs, community volunteers. That's the third link in the delivery chain. And then there's a local authority, a fourth link. Then there's the regional director of the literacy strategy. Then there's the national director of the literacy strategy who answers to me and I answer to the minister. Now we have a delivery chain. It's a very simple one in that case. But unless people work through what the delivery chain is, why do they think that they're going to make any difference? So I'm basically making 2 points. One is we're in a period of professionalising education system reform, and it's fantastic that you've organised this conference because it's a real opportunity to take that professionalisation further. And secondly, there is a process around the world of professionalising delivery, what I've been calling mockingly deliverology, which applies not just in education but across government agendas. And if we put together the professionalisation of system reform and the professionalisation of implementation, we can get powerful, successful reform in the next decade. Ben and others in Ontario, but also many others around the room, are beginning to demonstrate that that's possible.
Well, thank you very much. I think we can use the liberology, not only the education system, it's the political system.
We have to include it in spelling tests in primary school.
Well, I think your report on education is a classic and has a major influence on everybody. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Director of International Relations Department of Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport in Czech Republic.
Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to express, in the name of both of us, many thanks for inviting the Czech Ministry of Education to participate in such a great event, which will run now 3 days in Jerusalem. First, I would like to say that last general educational reform in the Czech Republic started in the middle of this decade. Of course, it's not enough time to bring you some important conclusions, summarization of results, but we have to say that since this time we have been implementing new curriculum for primary, for basic and secondary schools, and we try to open the door for every school to establish their own school educational programs in the framework of state standard curriculum, which was developed by the ministry and other experts and responsible institutions. Then I would like to bring you some goals which are now very attractive, which are very important in the Czech Republic if I speak about education. I would like to stress that when we're talking about education policy, we understand it in the context of lifelong learning. The lifelong learning strategy has become our fundamental principle, which aims to improve knowledge and competency for all individuals. The concept of lifelong learning is a response to the need of encompass all learning endeavors over the lifespan. If I speak about lifelong learning, I mean all forms of formal and informal education at all levels, from early childhood education and school to higher education, vocational education and training, and adult learning as well. Making lifelong learning a reality is one of the main objectives of our education policy. The increased pace of globalization and technology, the changing nature of work and the labor market, and the challenges posed by demographic development are among the forces emphasizing the need for continuing upgrading the work and life skills throughout life. In order to allow transition at international level and in order to become more competitive, the Czech educational system pays greater attention to raising the level of key competencies, which is from my point of view linked to other speakers who presented their presentations before me. If I speak about key competencies, I especially mean basic skills such as literacy and numeracy, making mathematics, science and technology more effective, and strengthening linguistic competencies. This cannot be achieved without high quality of teaching, adequate initial teacher education, continuous professional development for teachers and trainers. One of the main prerequisites for desirable, effective, high-quality teaching is to make teaching an attractive career choice, which is one of the nowadays greatest problems in the Czech Republic, which is linked to my British colleagues who made the presentation before me. Equally important are the improvements of the governance and leadership of education and training institutions and the development of effective quality assurance systems. Without efficient use of resources, both public and private, we could hardly achieve this. Next, our important goal is that education and training policy should be open to all citizens. Education and training systems should aim to ensure that all learners, including those from disadvantaged backgrounds, those with special needs and migrants, complete their education, including, where appropriate, through second chance education and the provision of more professionalized learning. Education should also promote intercultural competencies, democratic values, and respect for fundamental rights and the environment. Enhancement of creativity and innovation at all levels of education and training is one of the key drivers for sustainable social and economic development. To ensure the acquisition by all citizens of transfer of key competencies such as digital competence, learning to learn, a sense of initiative and entrepreneurship to promote cultural awareness. Czech Republic is now leading the European Union until the end of the first part of this year. And I would like to say that in the framework of the Year of Creativity and Innovation, we try to bring this topic to an educational point of view and try to show how, together with our colleagues from the European Union, how important it is to bring creativity and innovation to all education systems, including educational policies. Having listened to the main objective of our educational policy, we should not forget to mention that we are fully aware of the importance and need of monitoring the performance of lifelong learning, using and building on the already developed indicators and reference levels. In the monitoring process, apart from quantitative measures, aspects of quality and progress should be judged, so that we can follow how well the system of institutional legacy and policy structures facilitate lifelong learning education policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is François Mallet, Chief Inspector, Ministry of National Education in France. And I can tell you, I spent last year 2 months in Lyon, and I can testify we live next to a high school. The children are wonderful, well behaved and pleasant. Yes,
many should have come to all countries. Lots of but as the colleague from Ontario said, the real issue is that mass education of reasonably high standards. But I think he said we have 5,000 schools in Ontario. And France is a bigger country than most countries represented here, perhaps with England, which is smaller, without Wales and Scotland. And so we have 70,000 schools. We have 12 million students and 1 million teachers. And I just say that because one of our issues in France education system is not only providing teaching math and computer science, and I could talk about that too, this is an issue as everywhere else. But we have a big issue about political unity of the country because we are not organized on a federal basis. So we have one national country of 17 million inhabitants having the same education. So I'm afraid some of our characteristics are what we describe in the paper as a model of the past. But we haven't changed much because national unity is still an issue we address in the education system. And there is a relative consensus in the country about that issue. So it is assumed that we have a national curriculum, and it is assumed that it is the state's responsibility to make it. And it is also assumed that you have the high level performance as well as socializing objectives. And so it's one task of the Minister of Education to make a national curriculum in much detail, subject by subject, year by year. And I must add that all our teachers are civil servants, so we are the biggest employer in the world now. Once there was the Red Army and General Motors, and now we are first. So the reason why it is still quite authentic is because it's the backbone of the recovery that is called. And we have faith in free, compulsory, and non-religious education. So I think teachers still believe in that, most of them, not all. And one consequence is that they don't like to have intermediaries between the state and themselves once they were called the blessed God of the Republic. So they don't like to be managed at school level, and that makes a big difference with what my development just described and what has been the tendency of many European countries, that schools are fairly restructured in our system. Primary schools, so we have 60,000 primary schools, they don't have a head of school, so it's a community. And secondary schools have a head, but he has really few powers, and we don't have a middle management to help manage teachers, because teachers don't like to be managed. So I understand there is an issue of increasing private education. We are not near that in France. This should be a long way ago. I must say that we have a private sector. Fairly big, because it's about 20% of pupils go to what we call private schools, but they're not private in the way that foreign countries have private schools. 95% of them, including Jewish schools, Jewish schools, Catholic schools, they sign a contract with the church, and so they are committed to deliver exactly the same curriculum as all other public schools, because parents want education to be the same level. So they have religious education in addition to that, in extra hours. Also, the state is expected to regulate the system because we have equality, as you know, as much there or more than schools. So ideally, the state is there to bridge between social economy workforce people. For us, it's not a policy. Of the past, we have increased this policy in favor of disadvantaged schools just now. And now we're measuring the gap between French and math performance in the low-performing schools because they have so much to learn in addition. And I want to give another example on cultural grounds. We have a problem in other European countries in the sense of with Islamic fundamentalism, because we have 16 million people with all sorts of communities and religions and foreigners, and it's very hard to make a national identity. So they started having specific views about educational teachers, particularly concerning half of the curriculum is in math, physical education, the girls, history, history, certain parts of history, modern history, this is by the way to school. We have this and that was his famous law in 2004 to ban Islamic scarves. That's symbolic because in a way you are allowed to wear the clothes you want to, you don't have uniforms in school. But there was a huge consensus and the law was very different by the opposition. And I must say that after a few years, very few Muslim girls left the school system. They could have distance learning education. Very few children stayed in school when they take off scarves. Scarves is French for uniform. So because I don't have much time, I have one system going to implement reforms in France. Particularly as there are very few other stakeholders, because the state is always in the front line, always launching reforms, always implementing it. It's very difficult. And because the system is so big today, we don't have the relays and the implementation, as I said. So, I can't give a conclusion about which method is the right one. As I said, our present minister has launched 4 major reforms. One is a complete reform, one is a complete reform, one is half a reform, one is half a reform, and so it's difficult to say. As I said, you're tweaking today, working in primary school, it's not saying general education, so it's difficult to know. But what method is the right one?
Well, thank you very much. It was fascinating, and it just proves how much rooted in culture and history has to be. And changes are, you have to take that into consideration. But our last speaker this morning is Dr. Sakari Karkaleinen, Director General, Department of Education and Science, Policy, Ministry of Education in Finland, and we have heard a lot about success in Finland.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank for this opportunity to be here and discuss the basics of education with colleagues. During the informal discussions during the 2 days, I have already learned more than during the 3 years of my current post. I'm not sure how much countries can learn from each other, but I'm sure that we as experts and decision makers, civil servants, can learn a lot about the experiences of other countries. I think we have heard several presentations today, and there is not much I can add to what has already been said, especially what Sir Michael Barber summarized in his presentation. I would say concludes the core of this discussion. However, I suppose that you would be interested in knowing the possible explanations for the Finnish success in research studies, and I decided to present one possible explanation we have been discussing during the recent weeks. It is a problem for us because we really do not know what are the main things behind our success. But, I would say that one good explanation is a reform made in early 1970s. The whole school system was reformed at that time. And I would say a few words about that. First, what things could characterize the quality of the Finnish education system? I already mentioned the good outcome of the free PISA studies. But then I would add some more things. The dropout rate during compulsory education in Finland is less than 0.5%. Class repetition is only 2%, and more than 96% moves to upper secondary level. We have very small between-school differences, as has been demonstrated in the PISA studies. We are using the resources for education very effectively. The instruction hours are smallest in the OECD countries. The school days are shorter than in most other countries. We use about 6% of gross domestic product for education. It's about the OECD average. But going back to the big reform in the 1970s, before that we had a socially divided parallel education system, which resulted in very great achievement gaps between pupils from different social classes. There was a long and very heated debate in society, especially in Parliament, but it ended up with the Act on Basic Education Reform in 1968. And the implementation of this reform took place gradually. It started from the north, from Lapland, and in 1972, and ended up in Helsinki in South Finland in 1976. Besides this, we had the first national curriculum in 1970, and the system was very strongly centralized. And now I come to a paradox. We needed a very centralized system to implement this big reform. But and this reform, we think, is behind the success we have confronted now. Now we are picking up the fruits of the reform. But to maintain our good quality, we need a different kind of system. And the school system, education system, was gradually decentralized after the 1970s. It started in the 1980s. We had an inspection system until early 1990s. At the moment we do not have. Teacher education went to the universities in mid-1970s, so teachers are all master's degrees at the moment. And now, as I have described in my abstract, the system is based on a balance between clear national goals expressed in the core curriculum and implemented in a very decentralized, autonomical way at the municipal and school level. Teachers have a lot of freedom in Finland. They can choose the way they teach, they can choose textbooks. There was a pre-evaluation of textbooks in 1980s, but no more. So it's very much the responsibility of the teacher what kind of outcomes there are.
Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I think we reached the break, and we are going to have a break for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll continue with another round of discussion by the experts, and then the thank you very much. Another round of statements from our experts from abroad. And you can see on the map there are two new ideas that have been added to the map, from effective schools to effective systems, and deliverology, professional implementation, to move to the system. Now, please speak close to the microphone, because I was told that in the back of the room people cannot hear very well, so please speak closer to the microphone. Our first speaker from among the experts will be Professor Anthony Brick, President of Government. Right. I'm sorry. Professor Anthony Bright, President of Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching from the United States.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today with all of you. A few observations and maybe a conundrum or two. First, schools are only as good as the quality of their people and their capacity to work together. Seems like an observation that we might all be able to agree to. And yet, the irony when we look at most school systems, at least in the United States, if you understood this as your core business, if you're only as good as the quality of your people and their capacity to work together, the one thing you would really focus on is to really strengthen your human resource development system. And yet, most school systems in the United States are quite weak at this. And in fact, when you look around and you ask, well, who are the real experts at thinking about human resource development systems in education? They're actually very hard to come by. And that is an odd observation when you think about what's the core of our business, quality of our people, capacity to work together. When I look at the American context, the thing that seems very clear is that our nation does not get a fair share of its human resources. When you look at the human resources on a national scale, where do our best people go? Disproportionate numbers are going to business schools, law schools, even medicine, but they're not going into education. And to varying degrees, that is an issue in other countries as well. And ones that I think look better on international comparisons tend to actually be doing a better job at attracting a larger proportion of their nation's most developed human capital into schools. But simply attracting good people is not enough. What we now have is a fair number of new studies in the United States by virtue of these longitudinal data sets that have become available, which track both children and teachers over time. And these studies generally show that very small effects associated with formal teacher preparation programs, even initiatives. We have this initiative in the United States called Teach for America, which is drawing some of our best talent from our absolutely best universities, and yet when we look at the performance of students in those teachers' classrooms, they don't look on average that much different from ordinary teachers coming from ordinary pre-service teacher preparation programs. So while it's important to attract a larger portion of the nation's talent in teaching, the core problem still remains strengthening the systems by which individuals learn to teach well a curriculum and learn to teach it well to particular groups of students. That is the core problem that needs our attention. In focusing on that, the work that I've been involved in, the work that Carnegie, I think, will be advocating for over the years ahead, is really, in a sense, it's a level down from Michael Barber's discussion about deliverology, and I would call it really a focus on building a science of performance improvement. Here, very much inspired by work that has been going on now for a few decades in healthcare, and popularized by Atul Gawande in his book called Better. And if you haven't read it, I would strongly encourage you to read it, to think about issues around large-scale improvement of complex service delivery systems. And that's in education, I think, can learn things from the efforts in healthcare improvement. And it's very much about the day-to-day processes, the problems of work in large, complex organizations. And schooling is a very large, complex social service organization. And how one actually engages in processes of continuous improvement over and over again to try to advance the overall efficacy of these very large systems. Another point. In listening to the conversations this morning, I am struck by the significance of PISA data and other these systems of standardized reporting, and the effects that it's having on as nations think about their reform efforts. And this feels a little bit like the United States 20 years ago. And I worry that you may implicitly be moving along the same tracks that we moved along. You start with these national comparisons, and the next step becomes, well, we need to know this about each of our states or regions. And then that leads you to a logic that says, well, we need to know these data about each of our schools. And then before long, that leads you to a logic that says, and we must have these data on each of our students, as well as each of our schools, as well as each of our states. And pretty soon, you're down the path of a standardized assessment system like the United States. And I mention that because we are very attuned, the United States, to cross-national comparisons, and we're constantly looking abroad to try to take in the best lessons about what other nations are doing. But one of the things we are not paying much attention to are the different forms of assessment systems that operate in other countries. And as you think about this science of performance assessment, accountability clearly plays a central role in this. But one of the things I think we have not paid enough attention to are the different ways in which assessment are being carried out in different countries and the multiple functions that assessment serves, and what constitutes best practice with regard to assessments. And I worry that this is another domain where American practice has a way of driving others, and it's far from clear that what we're doing with regard to assessment is actually a best practice going forward. One final observation on an entirely different front. One of the things that I am struck by that is a phenomenon, it is a phenomenon in the United States, and in many, although not necessarily all of the countries around this table, is this issue about the incorporation in our educational systems of diverse students, diverse cultures, and how this has become a much more central concern in many countries over the last few decades. This really focuses attention on the historic function of schooling, which is the whole issue of the socialization of diverse others into a civil society. How one preserves indigenous cultures, acknowledges and respects those, but also looks to schooling to create the basis of a respectful civil society. In all of our attention about academic attainment, standards, subject matter content, all of which is very important, the question about the role of schooling in creating that common charter is another one of these, what I would call silences in the cross-national conversation. And yet it is so central to the issue about the role of schools in a civil society, and I also think merits more attention going forward.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Dr. Charlotte Frank, Senior Vice President, Research and Development, McGraw-Hill Education.
I have no microphone.
Well, that's
I can always give you my cafeteria voice.
So why don't you start the microphone there? It will be a good idea if all the speakers will speak from there, and we'll be looking at them and maybe understanding better their presentation.
All right. I can only say that I can give you my cafeteria voice, and you won't need this, but all right, I will take this. All right, thank you. There is something about technology. I have some comments to make, and I'll try and keep it under that 1 minute guidance that you have, because I've seen it go up. And this has to do with social emotional learning and character education, and the things that we feel are essential parts of the educational system. And that has to do also with feeling a sense of responsibility and respect for each other. Honesty, respect, responsibility, and recognizing the importance of the different ethnic groups. And there has to be a real sense of, yes, we care about you and you care about us and we are more similar than we are different. Just as I have been asked to come back. We do a thing with character education, and that's a major piece in the United States under character education. We do a piece with somebody called Peter, Paul, and Mary. There's a whole song, character education, and it has to do with the issues of song. Don't laugh at me. And as a matter of fact, your Israeli colleagues, CET and Ambassador Andrew Cox, wants us to come in and work with 6 schools, Arab Israeli and Jewish Israeli schools, to deal with that. But that's an issue that has been central in the United States, and it continues to grow. The other thing that I heard is the separation of content and child. First we're talking about the content, then we're talking about the child, and the whole thing that we know that has moved ahead and has been a major focus is that you can have these large schools have now been broken up into small schools, and these are theme-based schools. So you can have a school that may focus in on finance. You may have a school that focuses in on the health profession. You may have a school in which you have the occupational themes infused into the academic subjects. So for all kids, if they have an interest in it, the whole thing turns around. Now I know why I'm studying science. Now I know why the teacher taught me algebra, because suddenly I have to see a balance of equations. So what has happened is, and I haven't heard it come up here, that this is the way to make certain that we have more young people involved, because you are dealing with something that interests them, and that therefore they can focus in on all the academic achievements that we are looking for in the issues of standards and assessment. And the whole effective schools is still very much alive. The whole issue of effective schools is still very alive. It still has to talk about high expectations. And this goes back to the 1980s. We may give it different words, but they're still talking about we expect all our kids to learn. That is a given. And the other given is that when you look at the characteristics, there has got to be the principal, there has to be a principal leader. There's got to be that kind of leadership. Now, whether you're talking about a business community, there's got to be a business person that's involved. You're not going to have it otherwise. The same thing, you're not going to have a good district unless you have a superintendent. You're not going to have a good school unless you have a good principal. You're not going to have a good classroom unless you have a good teacher. And they all have to be involved in the expectations and the implementation of the plan. And for any community, the best thing to do is also involve your business community, no matter how small the business or how large the business. Because the kids, the people who buy from these places, and the kids that are there, they are very much all part of one family. So I just want to, I didn't have to have that minute come up. I just wanted to bring up a couple of these issues to take us past standards and assessments. They have to be there. And they've got to be formative assessment. It's got to be on an ongoing way. It's not a test you just give once a year, but it's got to be an ongoing way. How do I know whether what I've taught the kids have learned? And it's the same way I make the analogy. If I am playing golf, I better practice every once in a while, and I better see, can I hit the ball? Or if I'm dieting, I better get on a scale once in a while, and there's nothing wrong like giving a test. Did the kids learn what I was supposed to teach them?
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Professor Donald Purer, College of Education, Michigan State University, United States.
Thank you very much. It really is an honor to be here. My research is focused primarily on large-scale school improvement efforts in the United States. And my comments directly mirror those of our colleague from Ontario and from the UK regarding the need for system building. This frustration with the ineffectiveness of educational reform leads to a real concern for practice. That's the day-to-day work of teachers and leaders and students alone in interaction in improving that. This concern is particularly acute in chronically underperforming schools that serve large numbers of at-risk students in the United States. The complexity of that showed up in comments in our colleagues from Denmark and from the Czech Republic. Whatever standards we devise, whatever accountability schemes we put into place, whether we want schools to invent a solution or whether we want to devise a central solution that's enacted by schools, we need to develop new understandings of practice, as Tony was saying. And we need to build what Ben and Michael Barber called either infrastructure or delivery chains that enable us to support our ambitions for the day-to-day work of teachers and students and educational leaders. A lot of the discussion today about system building has been organized around something of a state school structure. But I think there's real questions to be asked about the role of government and non-government organizations in this type of system building. Many other organizations need to contribute to this system that would support our ambitions for changes in the day-to-day work of teachers and students and leaders. This includes the professions. It includes universities and other organizations that function as sources of pre-professional education and in-service education. It includes agencies engaged in knowledge production, both formal research and distributed experiential learning. It involves serious consideration about commercial organizations that provide us with textbooks and diagnostic assessments and information systems and the other hardware and resources that drive the day-to-day work. It requires very unusual knowledge and expertise to develop this type of system with different organizations, different individuals in them, functioning in a coordinated way to support common ambitions for teacher, student, and leadership practice. It requires being able to think outside of very highly institutionalized and culturally embedded understandings of what qualifies as a classroom, or a school, or a teacher, or a student, or a leader, or an intermediary organization, or a government organization. And a real trick is that we have to create these systems amidst currently functioning but unsatisfactory systems. It's not like we can devise an alternative system that we want and throw a switch and cut over to it. These new ways of working, these new capabilities need to emerge from the current system. Michael Barber suggested there's science of this deliverology. In my own work, I've drawn heavily on what it takes to develop capabilities in innovative startup sectors, like the information technology sector, simultaneously develop organizations producing the technology, but related regulations, funding streams, insurance, markets, market mechanisms. Even though this is a budding set of understandings, my contention is we really don't know that much about it. We don't know how to do it. Doing it is going to require a tremendous amount of widely distributed learning by individuals and organizations, along with uncommon means to accumulate these understandings in ways that fuel constant improvement of the system, constant refinement of our ambitions for practice, and constant change in practice. Just a couple final points. This sort of system building and its associated learning are really at odds with the usual political and policy cycles. They challenge assumptions about the resources needed to improve schools. They call into question conventional methods of rational management and require very unusual executive expertise. And it requires legitimizing the reality of the challenge of doing this type of work and developing understanding that this sort of system building is a very long-term enterprise. I think that one of the interesting things that we need to ask of our colleague from Finland is what was it in Finland that enabled a policy passed in the early 70s to mature over a 30-year period such that it functions as the response to what is it about Finland that seems to be working. So in the materials that I read and preparing for this, these issues were touched on. What systems exist and how they support differentiated assistance to schools. This showed up variably in people's documents that they prepared. I think a very interesting part of our afternoons could be to try to understand what types of educational infrastructure exists in other countries and how it supports what we frame here as policy implementation, importantly, differently for different types of schools, both high-performing schools and chronically underperforming schools.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Well, the last expert speaker will be Mr. Brad Victor, CEO and founder of Teach First Britain, UK. Should work.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a great honor to be declared an expert in front of so many experts here. I feel like a minnow in front of some quite amazing people who are gathered here today. I've tried to think through some notes from what people have said today and how it affects Teach First, which is the program I founded and I lead in Britain. Teach First is an adaptation of Teach for America. It's not Teach for America. So there's many differences, and you can find out about them on Wednesday when I give a talk. But one thing I would start is I would disagree with the point that Dr. Peled made. I think there are successful reforms. I think we're a successful reform. I think we've proven to be a successful reform. I also would say that what works in Texas or London doesn't necessarily work in Jerusalem. However, elements do work. And I think one thing I do believe is that education is different in different countries. However, it's not any more different than anything else is between other countries. So I think you could sometimes make too big a case over the differences between different education systems, from what I've seen. Sir Michael and Professor both made the point, and this was made many times today, that the most important thing in an education system is to attract talent. And that's true of any organization. That's true in business world where I come from. It's true in government. It's true in any organization. And schools, any organization, are only as good as the quality of the people. What you heard from the Finnish group, the Finnish representative, was that in Finland they don't spend more money on education than anyone else. They don't work more hours than anyone else, but they do attract the best talent, and that's why they're so successful. That's where we came from at Teach First, as a deliverology program. We deliver, basically, and what we try to deliver is to attract the best talent into the education system. And we try to attract them into the education system by being great teachers, but I think more importantly, as a number of people here have said, by actually getting into the system and creating that systemic change, actually being systemic change agents. So we always believe if someone does go in the program and teach for 2 years and then does something else the rest of their life and has nothing to do with systemic change in education, that's a bit of a failure. I wouldn't see that as a success for what we're trying to do. Sir Michael and a few other people have mentioned it's about leadership, getting those right conductors of the orchestra for the schools. In the British, what I've seen is there's no one more important than a head teacher of a school. And what we have as an organizational goal at Teach First is to get 1 out of every 6 challenging secondary schools to have one of our alumni as head teachers within the next 10 years. Currently, the people who come out to Teach First are the most talented people in Britain. I feel confident. I worked at McKinsey. I think we get better people than McKinsey. I think we get better people than anyone else in the UK. And how we do it isn't by paying them more, as a few people have said. You know, it's not by telling them what a great job this is. We tell them, this is a job where you show leadership from day one. We want to attract the best leaders. And in the Israeli context, I was talking to someone, how do the best military units attract the best people in Israel? It's not because they pay them a lot more money. It's because if you're a leader, you want to be part of the best, and you want to be working with the best. You want to get the support and the training that comes with being the best, and you want to have that network being in a group that's among the best. And that's what we do at Teach First, and we're very unapologetic about this. That said, we're very collaborative. We say to be the best, you have to collaborate in a very successful way with everyone else, and that no one person is going to change the education system. It's only through a whole collaborative program, and being that successful leader means collaborating well with all other teachers, with all other professionals in the system, and learning from them constantly as a lifelong learner that you're actually going to be able to make the change. I mean, the one thing I would say also, Estonia, which is interesting, has started the first program about 2 years ago called Norid Kuli, and I compare that, I know Roniti Roche mentioned about the problem of politics in Israel. I'm a great friend of Israel. I have a lot of relatives who live in Israel. I went to Estonia 2 years ago or 3 years ago at an invitation there, and they started the program within 1 year, and they're now in their second cohort. I've been coming to Israel for 5 years, meeting with different people about the program. Nothing's actually gotten started because of different political issues in this country. So I would put that as a challenge that I think at one point it was close to being started, and then there was the war in Lebanon, and I made the point, does Hezbollah make Israeli education policy now, which is what it felt like. And I would say, you know, I think in a knowledge economy, there's nothing more important than the quality of the teaching, than the quality of school leadership. That's what Israel is, a knowledge economy. To succeed in the future, you need to attract the best teaching, you need to attract the best leadership. Everyone here knows that. I feel this is a program that can enable countries to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Now, everything is. Now, I think this round of expert statements brought out some new ideas. Among them, as I understood, Professor Bright brought out the question of in general, which is a complex issue, but we are doing the right thing, the wrong thing. Dr. Frank brought out the team-based schools. It's a new idea that hasn't been discussed before, which I think is very interesting. And then Professor Buran brought out the role of NGOs and other agencies in this whole process, which is exemplified by Brett as to what he is doing. So I think these are rather interesting additions to the ideas that came out before, and in my opinion, I don't know how you decided, that they should be added somehow to the map.
There will be added.
Okay. During the break. Okay. Now we are turning to the next stage of the morning discussion, and that is going to the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Education. And Dr. Stani, you want to?
Well, we will speak.
You will speak. Okay. You have much on your mind. Okay, so let's go then to Shlomita Mihai. She's just, pardon? You want to talk? Okay, think it over. I can come back to it. So the next one then, Chief Elek. Well, we are doing very well.
So I will start the 3 points.
Dr. Shoshani, as I mentioned, third time.
It's my third time in the same position.
That's right, so you can come back and come back in
our trouble in Israel is that there is no consensus about educational goals. Our schools are like a supermarket. We are expected our schools to answer to different pressures by interest groups, and I know many countries around the world. I don't know about such pressures in any other countries. So we are in trouble because there is no consensus about goals, and of course you can't agree about objectives, measurable objectives, and as all of you know, at least the professionals, politicians are running away from measurable goals. I hope it will be now the first time in Israel that we will try to set some measurable goals. The second point I would like to mention is about reforms. Mr. Pellet said something about the failure of reforms and so on. I remember reading an article by an American historian about if only in the history of education in the United States, and of course it's relevant to the history of education, at least in Israel. If only we will change the structure of the educational system in Israel, we will achieve whatever. If only we will reduce the number of students in class, that's now
very popular in Israel, to an average of 32. Our achievement gap between the achievers and those who are not achieving well will narrow in such and such a percent. If only we will change our curriculum, we could achieve everything. So I have a list of 15 if-onlys, and we are trying a lot. And one conclusion that I arrived to from my experience in the educational system in Israel, that there is no a recipe in education. There are alternatives. There is not a one way, the only way and the one way. There is always alternatives. You have to choose between alternatives, and you are influenced by a lot of forces in the decision-making process. Sometimes you are choosing what became a success. Sometimes it becomes a failure. So that's my second point. My third point will be about the budget. Of course, about money, because education has to do with money. So there are some countries who look upon education as an investment, and they are investing a lot. There are some countries who didn't decide about it and look upon education as an expenses. So it's a big difference, and in order to achieve a good quality in education, it's not only a question of money, but yes, it depends on your investment. And we just finished a fight about our budget, educational budget. It was a very tough one, especially in such an economical situation right now in the world, but it symbolized a lot. And my last point is about the teacher unions, which wasn't mentioned over here in all the changes that you have to go through in the educational system, and maybe the situation is different from country to country, but the teacher unions can't force their own reforms on the educational system, but they have the power to prevent a government to achieve its goals and objectives. So it's not an easy life in our systems, but we have to do our best.
Well, thank you. I think you brought us down to the Israeli reality that we are facing now in the most difficult way. Our next speaker is Dan Sharon, former Director General of the Ministry of Education. And then last but not least will be Eliezer Shmuel.
I don't have a mic.
There is a mic.
Here is a mic. You have a mic. Okay. Yes, thank you. I want to say the following things. I'll make it very short. As we know, the objective of all of the discussions here is our school. So let me say a few words about our schools in Israel. A few remarks which will perhaps help us define better our policies. First of all, I want to say that we have in Israel a bifold culture. The culture, the policies, the general decisions, the discussions that take place like we do here, and the actual school culture, which is totally separated and not in contact, not in touch with our policies. These schools have developed a kind of a double-faced culture, where they say, okay, they talk, they act, but what they do is something else. In a way, it is a reaction to the biological clock. I call it the governmental clock. Every 2 years, another 2 years,
and other government, new kinds of reform decisions, etc., schools develop a kind of an immunity to our reforms, and they resist it quietly. So we need to understand this point. The next point I want to make is that most of our reforms, decisions, new rules stay outside schools, and the other thing is stay outside schools. This means schools do not behave actually in accordance, and they are very resistant to all of our discussions, especially here in Israel. And the next point I want to make is that additional budgets are not successfully translated by schools to results which can be measured or not measured, doesn't matter right now, but they are not translated to results which we expect them to. This means we think that we will bring more money in or make decisions that cost money, etc., but at the end, we don't get results. So this is another very important, I think, aspect we need to look at. Now, let me only a few very short remarks. Our schools are not relevant to a very large portion of our student population. They are not relevant. They are not relevant to the good students, what we call good in inverted commas, because they don't give them an answer. They are not good to the average students because they don't prepare them for real life in Israel. And of course, the lower echelons, the 2 or 3 students at the bottom, they also feel not at home in our schools, shall we say. And we need to think of that because actually there is a separation within schools between the various populations. And one more remark. We must understand that we are only partners in our schools, we are not the owners. This means that we are not dictating what happens there. There are other organizations, people, etc., who actually determine what schools are actually doing. And this is a totally new, a different approach than an ownership approach. And my last remark. I think that by making a policy today, we need to ask the question, after having analyzed all these practicalities of schools, etc., do we have to use schools as our only outlet of budget when we want to achieve certain results in our student society? Do we have to stick to the existing schools? Since it is quite hard to change things within schools, since there are so many other problems, etc., don't we have, maybe we should also think about other institutes or create new frameworks where education takes place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good. That's the info. Ronnie, do you want to say just a word?
Two remarks and one question, please. What I heard today is mainly, that was quite common to all the participants, that the delivery chain is very important. And I don't know how many partners you have in each country to this delivery chain, but in Israel you have, besides the government and the education minister and the finance ministry, you have, of course, the education ministry professionals, the supervisor, all the principals all over the country, and then you have the school principals and the teachers, and of course the unions, and the local authority, and many times even the parents, supporting by the media, and the NGOs, and the other organizations in our economy. This is one thing. So if we want to be sure that the policy is very clear to each of these partners, it's a long way to do. Until it comes down to the small details.
That's part of the chain that people are talking about.
Yeah, but it depends how many parts you have in this chain. As long as it is, it's more difficult. And the other remark is about what I heard from Mr. Brett Winsdorf. I pronounce it good. About the leaders' equality. the quality of the principals and the teachers by themselves. And I heard the Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, before he was elected to be Prime Minister. I talked with him, and he was reading the McKinsey report, and he told me, listen, I'm going to change the status of the teachers in Israel to, in Hebrew it says, Sayeret Matkal. How we can translate it. The best of the best from the army. Elite unit, right. And I said, how you are going to do it? Of course, I asked, you're going to give more money, and then if it's a good salary, so we'll have many people coming, and we can choose the best. He said, no, it's not a matter of money. I just have to declare that I'm looking for the best leaders, like you said before. I don't know how to do it. I feel like a chain. I mean, I don't know how to break the tie between money and salary, high salary, and good people coming to the system. So if you can tell me how we can do it, it's the best. And the last thing is the question. Nobody mentioned, I think, the early childhood. Because in Israel we have the largest gaps between the children inside the school and inside the class, which is impossible. It's a paradox, you know. What we are doing to invest more in early childhood in order to prevent from the beginning the creating of these gaps.
Thank you. We have to watch out of spending too much money because all the financial experts who mess up the economy will come to teach. Now, Eliezer Shmuel.
Now it's better. Tomorrow I have a totally different subject that I would like to introduce, but today I will just have some reactions to the things that have been said until now. My first reaction is that when we established the State of Israel and we had in mind to educate all the children of the nation, then we actually had to look for a variety of subject matters, to be creative as much as we can in order to cater for all the different needs of different children. Now it seems to me that during the last years, the State of Israel, following international examinations, following actually a terrible drive to get excellent scholastic achievements, we are sacrificing the need to cater for those that cannot rush in this run towards excellence. Sometimes in the 80s, we had in mind to establish a comprehensive school that will have the different children with different capabilities and to try and strive as much as they can to get to the top, provided that every one of those studying under the same umbrella will have a chance to potentialize their capabilities. Unfortunately, really unfortunately, during the last 2 decades in the State of Israel, we are actually trying to keep on measuring the scholastic achievements of our final examinations in the end of the secondary or the high schools, as we call them in America, and unfortunately we are forgetting those that are not able and they can't study in the university, while having in mind that what we call the matriculation examinations actually must be a kind of a key towards the studies in the institutions of higher learning. But let's think reality. In every society, in the ages of adolescence, actually ranging from 12 to 18, we must add those that might be working in different subjects, in different professions, without becoming scholars in the universities. I would like to compare, unfortunately I don't know the answer, how many students
today in Switzerland or in England will graduate with A level in order to go to the university versus Israel. It became, unfortunately, in Israel a political, as you said, a political phenomenon that the ministers are standing with a watch in order to demonstrate their capabilities to improve the scholastic achievements, and sometimes they are ready actually to lower the standards of education in order to prove or demonstrate success. My feeling is that we must cater to the children according to their capabilities. The Ministry of Education recently declared that we are about to establish, or at least to open the schools under the compulsory law of education from the age of 5 to the age of 18. I know that in England sometimes teachers are praying when the Christmas leavers at the age of 16 drop out and go to different professions. And then here they will, I'm scared to death that students that never studied in the 11th and 12th grades due to the fact that we didn't have compulsory education up to this very age. And they went to become laborers. Excuse me, there are criminals that graduated from universities. It has nothing to do with criminals. By no means. This is an insult. No, excuse me, no, I don't accept that. He who cannot be a professor in university, or he who cannot even enter the gates of the university, I don't have to push him. You know, in the Boy Scouts, there is a kind of agreement that you have to do a goodwill once a day. So I know some Boy Scouts that see the old lady and they push her into the street in order to actually have an X that they did their contribution to the society. One thing. The second thing is that we have to bear in mind, in our country, approximately 1/3 of our students in the secondary school level go to boarding schools. The boarding education is an interesting place to observe. We did in the past screen children from the periphery. We brought them into good schools. We gave them a chance and they proved to be a great success. I would like to sum in one word. My friends, education means catering for every student with his very special personal capabilities. If we won't do that, and we'll be following the methods of politicians to try and push all of us into the so-called excellence, it will be a national failure.
Thank you. We certainly have seen this educational system in long-term perspective, and you speak also from a long experience and a graduate phase, and I think your words are very much appreciated. I think this turn, it was interesting. I think again we have some new ideas here. First of all, I think Dr. Shoshani brought down the issue which wasn't quite clear before, prioritization. You have many alternative differences, but how you really prioritize your interests and how you put them together, and the issue of unions, which I thought would come up in our discussions with former Director Generals. I thought that would be a #1 issue from what I read in the newspapers. I'm not exactly educational here. He mentioned it too. But it didn't come out, and it was, but I think that's a real issue, and Shilso brought it up.
It's not politically correct to...
But it's a reality, so I think it should be politically correct. I think the issue of what Dan Sharon brought up, whether the feeling of very many students, high school students, elementary school students, that the school is not relevant to them, that's a major concern, should be a major concern of the educational system, because if that is the case, then nothing can help. And that's related to a whole range of other issues. And then what Ronit brought up, early childhood, which wasn't mentioned before, which I think it is crucial in many respects to what will happen later in school and parenthood and all that. It's also an important issue which bridges to what Shmuelek said about what happens after, when they drop out or not. And that requires some major changes in the higher education or post-secondary education system to accommodate all those students that couldn't do it in the high school. And I think there are many solutions to that. And in other work we have discussed that. So now we ended another stage in our discussion. Now we open up the floor to whoever wants to contribute. But in this case, I will go over to the other place because I can't see the whole. I'll let him speak first instead of the chairman. This time, except Gabi Motsky, I'll ask the people to say their name so that for the record we have it.
With your permission, if I may, Mr. Chairman, may I add one sentence?
Yes.
Since we spoke, as I heard my colleagues speaking about measurable scholastic achievements, we didn't hear during this morning's session something about value education, what is going on with aggressive behavior, vandalism, all those good things that come under the title education. And I believe that we should think about it as well in such a conference.
Yeah, you're right. I alluded a little bit in my opening remarks to what values are. We have to impart of them. How to do it is a different story. Okay, Gabi wants in.
Yes, I want to first say when I come away from this, there's a lot of things, and then I want to say one thing that I thought was only alluded to by one of these Israeli Director Generals. And when I come away from this is that the area that needs greatest development is the idea of systems of education. That no reform can be done without a reform of the system and how the system works, and that not enough attention has been paid, at least in our system. Some attention was paid to that, but not all these reforms were implemented because of political and social pressures. I want to say something. Now, I don't know how many of you are in my position, because although I'm not so young, I have reasonably young children, and as a result, I'm able to observe what goes on. And what goes on is the Internet. Everything that happens in the educational system is in dialogue with the Internet, with information from the Internet. Every paper that is written in relation to the Internet. Every material, it's a completely parallel educational system. The educational system in that sense is not autonomous. Not autonomous from the kinds of inputs we have today, because this is not film and television and rock music and all the rest, which we all grew up with, or at least I and my generation. This is something that is constant on an everyday basis and has largely replaced reading as the primary source. No matter how often I tell my kids to get off the Internet or something, they're on it. And they're on it for school, and they're on it 4 or 5 hours a day. And that's it. First it was games, now it's homework. I think that reality has to be confronted because it is the reality of the future, I think, in a large part of the developed and probably in the underdeveloped world as well, as things, as this product gets cheaper and cheaper. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's interesting, but that could be it's part of the problem. It could be part of the solution. That's right. Yes, please state the name.
I'm the Director General of Rama, which is the Israeli National...
Do you have a microphone? Where's the camera? Will you please press it on? I think this is recorded, so you better speak into the microphone.
Okay. Michal Beller, I'm the Director General of Rama, which is the Israeli National Institute for Evaluation and Measurement in Education. My question is actually a continuation of Professor Brag's comment. What are the different models of accountability in the various countries that are around this table? We're rather familiar with the No Child Left Behind and to some extent British model, but it seems to me that there are some different ones that exist around the table, and it will be very interesting to learn more about this. Professor Schleifer, who was here, our guest last week, made a distinction between vertical and lateral accountability, and I think we need to know more about lateral accountability, and if it exists in your countries, then please let us know more about this. Because about the damages of high-stakes testing, we know a lot, both in the West, the collateral damage of high-stakes testing, the book about England, about the tyranny of testing. We know some of the damage here, also some of the positive aspects as well.
but I'd like to know more about other systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, all participants, it is open to all participants, including the representative of the country, the experts, anybody, the audience, anybody wants to speak. Yes, please.
I can't say that very much about testing and so on, and navigation, because we haven't worked very much with that in Sweden, but we are planning to do that more in the future. But I want to talk a little about vocation training. We heard a little about that before. In Sweden, there has been very much focus on academic education, and it has been seen as very important to make more young people study at the universities. But now we think, well, this is not the important thing. Now we say that it's not important to have more people studying at the university. It's important to have a high quality at the universities. We think that for many young people it's important that they get a good vocational training. We have that in the upper secondary schools, which start when they are 16. Before there was said that every child, every young person should go through the upper secondary schools. It could be an academic program or a vocational program, and they also get the basic qualifications, eligibility for studying at the university. And this didn't work as it was planned, because in reality this just led to more and more dropouts, and that fewer and fewer 20-year-old boys and girls did go through the upper secondary schools. So now we're changing this to say that if you're 16 years old, you want to have a vocational training, okay, it's fine. You don't need to study that much academic subject in the future as it has been before. You have the possibility if you like, and okay, there's also always a possibility after 10 years later, lifelong learning is important to us too, to get the qualifications that is necessary to study at the university. So we think that vocational training is necessary. We try to attract more young people to go through education training.
That will connect nicely with the theme schools that Dr. Frank mentioned. It falls in the same kind of large category. Yeah. Yes, please, Nahan.
Just on the theme for a couple of the themes that were mentioned, just a couple of comments on the catering for each child, and I think Michael Barber mentioned that the good system cater for diverse students, and I think the challenge for all of us, and we, like my Danish colleague, are spending an increasingly very significant amount of money on special support. It's 10% of my total budget, which would include higher education and everything else, so it's probably as close enough to being 15-20% of the school budget. But I think the issue of, and it was mentioned, the question of meeting each child's needs, but also not having lower expectations for certain students, because certainly in many of our schools for students from a socially disadvantaged background, one of the real challenges is teacher expectations of such children. And much of our research would show that actually one of the crucial factors, apart from quality of teaching, is the expectation of the school and the student, the school and the teacher, for that student given their family background. And I think the challenge is to perhaps provide an appropriate education without having an expectation that suggests because of that child's background the appropriate education is different than what we might expect of a child from a different strength or social background. So I think there is a balance there that, and it leads me perhaps to comment on the vocational system. We have separate systems for many years, which indeed from about the 1970s our second level system has become a more general system without separate vocational schools. And then we went through a period where it was felt that we were not providing enough vocational appropriate training for some students where that might be more appropriate. But we took a decision that one of the difficulties of having a completely separate vocational program is the status. You then have a status of the leaving certificate exam, which is seen as being the high status exam, and the vocational exam, which is seen as lower status. So instead we try to offer more subject differentiation and programs within our high-stakes terminal exams that had an equal status, but which were more appropriate to students who perhaps had more vocational skills and challenges. And some programs within that perhaps that were more suitable for students, particularly male students from certain backgrounds who would have difficulty in, we have quite high completion rates, but in the post-16 that might make it more attractive to stay in school. And technology, for example, has been a very good way of, say, improving traditional subjects that has been possible to engage certain groups. So I think one needs to be careful about how one balances those issues. Just a quick word on teacher unions, which are very strong in Ireland. We have a partnership model. Much of our current education legislation was introduced in the 1990s, and there are legal requirements for partners in education, parents, unions, management bodies, to be consulted, and in some cases we can only enact regulation when it has been agreed by all partners, which gives rise to rather complex issues in progressive reforms or even minor implementation issues. In fact, let me say that in the professional areas, in the teacher professionalisation standards curriculum, it's worked very well. We have a very good partnership engagement. It can be more problematic in areas to do with changing rules about tackling teacher underperformance or school underperformance. And just on an issue of model of accountability, which somebody asked about, even though we are very proximate to the United Kingdom, and we tend in many areas to say, what did they do, and try and copy it. There is a huge resistance in our system and fear of models of accountability arising from what they saw in the English system. Anything that approaches, anything that might be called deep take is a subject of huge nervousness, particularly for teachers in schools. So we have ended up in a sense with perhaps not enough accountability to parents. We've now, in the last number of years, we've published whole school evaluation reports by our inspectors, but there are laws that prohibit effectively anything that would lead you into a league table situation. So the trick for us, because at its extreme we have not enough standardised testing, as I think was referred to by Charlotte. We have only now managed to roll out standardised testing for schools to use to inform their pedagogical practice. But we did that by agreeing that the ministry, that nationally that's not accessible. It's accessible to researchers and it's accessible to an inspector in a particular school. But the predominant reason it's used is for improving the practice within the school. So I think there has been, we will have real issues going forward of how we deliver more accountability about school performance to the parent and community bodies without getting into the sensitivities of the concerns that what happens with league tables is it discourages schools from taking a mixed intake, and it encourages schools to try and recruit the best in order to get good performance. So it's, in all these things there are very balanced schools.
Thank you. You mentioned vocational schools versus the regular school and the problem of status. Similar things happens in the higher education system, colleges and universities. They have a different status, and I think the answer to that is mobility. To provide sufficient mobility from one to the next one so that people don't feel constrained in the particular direction they took. University of California did a marvelous job on that. You can start in the lowest level college in California and end up in UC Berkeley if you are doing well. And the sense of mobility and the sense of openness is what's important. The same with vocational to the other side, to the other schools. If it will be available, there won't be a feeling of low status and high status, I think.
We have a similar issue at universities and have been quite successful with our national qualifications framework in the post-schooling period of getting very good mobility and people who have started without perhaps a certificate or even have dropped out of school being able to come back in and do. I think the problem is the age at which you separate students. And we have done some longitudinal studies, for example, which are about halfway through our cycle, where there was independent testing, and then we tested how students were classified in schools. to measure whether, well, to measure lots of things about the school experience, but measuring the screening, when you screen students by ability. And actually one of the frightening things was how poor schools were compared with objective tests at screening, at ability screening. In fact, when you actually looked at how they actually screen. So I think mobility, yes, but if you separate it too early, you make progress.
Thank you. It was Dan Geron who mentioned some kind of school immunity to reforms. And it leads me to say that it's our experience that you can't make real change in the school if you don't have the teachers with you. I mean, you can make all the reforms you want, think out anything, but if the teachers do not agree, if they are against it, they will not implement it, or they will do what they have to do in the school, what is controlled, but then at the same time they will send other messages to the pupils that this is actually a stupid thing to do, and thus completely ruining the intentions of the initiative. This leads me to stress, I told you before about these national tests we have developed. We are very much aware that if this shall be a success, we must have the teachers to realize that there's something in it for the teachers. It is something that helps the teachers to improve their teaching. So these tests are not designed to classify different schools or different classes or different pupils. In fact, the results of the tests are a secret. Only the teacher knows the results of each individual pupil, and the results of the schools are not compared. They are kept secret because we do not want this to be seen as a sort of simplified way of measuring the best schools and those who are not good. It is a pedagogical instrument, first of all, to help the teachers to improve the teaching. If we don't do that, the teachers will see it as a way of controlling them and as a way of criticizing them, and we will not achieve the success we expect from it.
Thank you. Before Mr. Fricks speaks, if any of the Israeli participants wish to speak in Hebrew, please do so, because I see there are no discussions from the audience or from the other participants. So feel free to do so, and we'll try to translate if you don't want to speak in English. Yes, the first Mr. Fricks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only a brief remark. I provided you in the required presentation with the Czech strategy in the lifelong learning. One of the most important parts of our strategy is the recognition of outcomes from informal and non-formal education. We think that the world is moving very fast, and it's not enough to be graduated in one subject for the whole life. So that's why I think that we have to open the door widely for further education with respect to age and duties for adult students. Informal education will be more and more will play more and more important role in every educational system, and we have to build up some systematic framework for its recognition. That's why we adopted Act dealing only with recognition of informal education to open the door for adult education and for adults in the Czech Republic.
Interesting, excellent.
I would like...
Just take a microphone, please. And the name. I have here.
My name is Nahum Blas. I work in the Tauber Institute. I would like to point out a danger. To me, it looks like an imminent danger of the international tests. We are facing here almost a tyranny of those international tests that every country, and almost most of the people here, the delegates from the countries, also were comparing the results of the test of their country and the scale. Where are they on the level? Whether they are up one grade or down one grade, and that's what many countries are looking up to, those international tests, and they are forgetting, in my opinion, most of the the things which are most important in the education. And you cannot have one scale for all the 50 countries, or that Professor Schleicher said that there are almost 3/4 of the students all over the world, and you measure them on one test or two tests in one subject. It seems to me that we are losing the importance of what's going in education really, and we have to look at it.
Yeah, well, Professor Bright refers to the question of assessment, and Shmueli spoke about it. But unfortunately, we live in a global world, and that's what happens. And even President Obama, in his speech 3 weeks ago, at the National Academy of Sciences, declared that he wishes in 10 years that the United States be listed among the top 10 something in peace and peace.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, but there are other ways. There are other ways to find out about the value of a system and whether it is successful or not. Many other ways, much more important. For example, if there are what's their cultural production, and what is many other values which are important about education.
Absolutely, I don't disagree. I just mentioned that. Ms. Malati.
Just was that it is an international test. We are average in fact, it's just about average. What we found out that there are fewer differences between countries, which is the only thing that we look at, the average of each country. But we have bigger differences within each country among separate groups of students. And that hasn't been, that's what we are trying to look at in France, because half our population have the same results as Finland. All the students that just go up the stream. And those who have difficulty, they have very low results that take the average down. So in a way, the national policies, the principal conclusion is rather how we do it within our country than just measuring differences between averages.
Thank you. Now, I'm getting notes here that we have to break for lunch one after the other, and so I would let Professor Wright make the last comment, and there will be opportunities in the afternoon to continue the discussion. There's plenty of time left, so I don't stop any major discussion.
On the issue of the assessments, I just want to make one, I think, critical distinction. We need assessment information and other forms of quantitative data to inform reform. But there's a difference between that and assessment-driven accountability. And that's, I think, a critical distinction worth thinking more about in crafting a productive system.
Okay, maybe there were the answers lies to some extent. So thank you very much.